So, the continuation of the Ruth and Naomi story. Naomi goes to sell her land to give up her inheritance. And the person who was to inherit it next would have to give up way too much in order to receive it. And so he gives it to Boaz, which is a little bit what they had planned. And Naomi is restored again. Because as Boaz takes on Ruth as his wife, he takes on Naomi as his mother-in-law. And together, this family rebuilds their line. If you listen to the last verse of this, you hear that Obed is the father of Jesse, who is the father of David, who is the father of Joseph. The lineage of Jesus Christ comes out of this seemingly broken pair of women, where everything else they had was completely gone. They were not okay. Any prospect of prospering or of having a successful life or having a life that was worth something seemed completely out of their grasp. And by the end of the book of Ruth, their entire lives have been restored, and they are part of the direct lineage of Jesus the Christ. This, I think, is wildly important for us to note, because Jesus' line is not filled with people who get it right. Jesus' line is not filled with folks who are perfect and who have all of the right answers. Instead, Jesus' lineage is from broken, beaten down, not okay people. Jesus comes out of the brokenness of life. Jesus comes to us not with a lineage like they do with show dogs, right? Where you can, if you have a dog that you're going to like show and put on in dog shows, you want to be able to track their lineage. I know that was ridiculous. It's okay. You want to be able to track their lineage and know who's in their family, and you want the best of the best of the best. And one might think that that's the line that God would want to come from if God were going to pour God's self into the world. And instead, Jesus' lineage is one full of brokenness, one full of hurt, one full of scrappy young women. Go read the story of Tamar. Of people who didn't get it right all the time. Jesus comes from a place in which real people live real lives. The fullness of the ups and the downs. Additionally, from this narrative, what we remember is that God's timing is absolutely not our timing. Right? All of the things that we had hoped for and desired and wanted don't always work out the way that they're supposed to, but somehow it works out even better. So if you listen to the first part of this sermon series, or the first part of this sermon duet last week, you would have heard me talk about my junior year of college and the boy who broke up with me, right? Who I really thought we were going to get married. And I look back to that time in my life, and I am reminded that if I had had it my way and I had married that guy, I never would have met Matt. I never would have gotten married in the middle of a pandemic. I never would have had the life that is fully complete in finding my partner in life. I would have spent my whole life making myself smaller and less than to fit into a particular image that somebody else had for me, instead of the opportunity of being fully known and fully loved. God's timing was never my timing. Right? The broken roads that led Matt and I to be together in both of our lives were what neither one of us would have ever asked for. But by the time God did what God was going to do, it produced something beautiful, something sacred, something far better than either one of us had ever imagined. I think that's exactly how God works in our not okayness. Right? We experience these moments in which we feel like we have lost absolutely everything. All of our plans and our hopes and our dreams just to seem to fall through our fingers as though it were sand. And yet, at the end of the day, what God does in the midst of that is even more beautiful and more amazing than you and I could ever imagine. Ruth and Naomi struggled for years to figure out what they were going to do with their lives. They both believed that they were down for the count and there was nothing more for them except bare minimum. They believed that there was no hope left for them, and that there was no way that they were possibly going to get out of the situation of being widows in Israel, in Moab. There was no way that these two women would ever find fullness of life again. And yet, God's timing produced something even more incredible. A son is born to Ruth, and the lineage begins again. The lineage of what was hopeless is filled with hope. God made a way where there seemed like there was no way. God's timing never works the way you and I think it's going to. God's timing is never part of what we expect it to be a part of. It never happens the way we'd like to happen. And the more that we spend trying to control God's timing, the unhappier and more frustrated we become. It's hard to wait and to trust that something is happening. In our Bible study this past Wednesday night, we're reading Max Lucado, or past Monday night, we're reading Max Lucado's Unshakable Hope. And the most important thing that I pulled out of last week's chapter was that we know the ending of the story. So Max Lucado talks about, he's a big Dallas Cowboys fan. I'm not really sure why, but he is. And at the end of his, he would work all morning and into the early afternoon because he's a pastor, so he'd miss all of the football games. So he used to record them and then watch them. And one day, one of his congregants spoiled the game for him and told him that the Dallas Cowboys won that game, which I can understand. It's a big deal. So he watched the game anyway, and he writes in this book about how much more powerful being able to be in the moment of watching the game was when he knew how it ended. So when the Cowboys were down, or they fumbled the ball with 6 minutes left to go, there was this assuredness in the viewing that he knew exactly what was going to happen at the end of the day. He knew what the ending of the story was. And I think that that's a beautiful metaphor for everything we do in life. We know the ending of the story, right? We know that God has conquered everything. We know that eternal life is gifted to us through Jesus Christ. We know who holds the future. We know the ending of the story, even when we like to forget that we know the ending of the story. And so if we know the ending of the story, how does that change the way that we watch the game? Right? If our lives are a game that we are participating in, but we know at the end who's going to win, even when we're down in the second half, or we fumble the ball with 6 minutes left to go, or somebody, really messes up in the last 3 minutes, we know what happens. So even in the midst of the moments of our lives when we are not okay, we know that God is still in control. And we trust the promise that God works all things for good for those who love him. So if we know how the story ends, right? We all know that God wins, that love wins, that at the end of the day, God has us all in his hands. And we're going to be fine. So if we know that, if we know the ending of the story, how does it change how we live in the in-between times? Doesn't mean that they don't stress us out and make us not okay. It doesn't mean that we don't panic in the moment. But it means that when we see it, we know. Many of you know I am a huge Kentucky Wildcat fan. Yes, go Cats. And one of my favorite things to do is to be able to watch the Cats play. I prefer to do it in stadium, but they're only ever in New York once a year. And I would love to know at the end of the game who's going to win, because it stresses me out while I'm playing. And I find that I can't actually focus on what's happening in the game because I'm so overwhelmed about who's going to win. And I'm so worried that my team won't win that I am that person. Here's the confession. I am that person who stands in the stands or in my living room and screams at the players. I mean, screams. I scream at referees. One time I almost got kicked out of a high school basketball game that I was watching somebody playing because I got a little testy with the referees. Oops. I am a person who is so focused on wanting to win that I am that person. But what happens is I forget to watch the game. And in forgetting to watch the game, I miss all of the incredible plays that my guys make. I watch all of the incredible work that this team has strived for and worked together to have not matter. I no longer care about the growth of individual players or the growth of the team as a whole, and all that matters in my brain is who wins and who loses. If I knew the ending of the story, if I knew who would win, I'd probably respond a lot differently. Because instead of screaming and yelling about needing to get more points on the board than the other team, and maybe one or two derogatory comments about the other team, sorry, I would actually be able to appreciate the game for all that it is. And I would be able to live in the fullness of the moment instead of needing to rush to the end. What does that look like for us in our lives? To not be screaming and yelling on the sidelines, wanting so hard to force a hand so that things go our way, and forgetting to be in the moment. If we already know the ending of the story, if we already know where God is and how God redeems the whole wide world, then can't we live in the ups and the downs a little more fully? Knowing that what we're going through right now may be the shadow of the valley of death, but we fear no evil, for we know God is with us. Whether we are in the valley of the shadow of death or the mountaintop with the transfiguration of Jesus Christ, feeling the full presence of God, shouldn't we know that we know the ending of this game? And so when we're in the darkest pits of our lives, we can be not okay and still know that this is not the end. And we are at the highest of highs Know that this is a glimpse of what happens at the end, but this too probably isn't the end? Would we be able to appreciate more the moments that we have? I think one of the things that quarantine has taught me is how much I miss people and how much I have taken for granted. Right? Like, I'm a hugger. I like to hug people. And I think I have taken the opportunity to be able to hug people for granted. For being able to see my friends. Or to be in a physical space with somebody, not 6 feet apart, not hiding, but not covered by a mask. I think I've taken a lot of simple things in life for granted. My hope is that when I come out of this, when we all come out of this, that we're in the moment a little bit more. That we appreciate every aspect of life, that we stop rushing to know the end because we already know it. God's timing is not our timing, so we know that God holds the future, but we have no idea what that looks like. Ruth and Naomi thought they were down and out and nothing was going to bring their family back until Boaz walked into the picture and inherited everything. Naomi thought she was barren and would have no more children, and her daughter-in-law has the beautiful grandson, Obed. And all of the things that she thought she lost, all of the places in her life in which she was down and out and over, God said, stand back up one more time. Don't stop fighting. Your timing is not my timing. I will fulfill the promises that I have made to you. I'll do it in my time, for I know all things, but I will fulfill the promises I have made to you. It changes things. At least it does for me. I know how this story ends. I know where I go when I take my last breath on this earth. I know who holds the future. I need to do a better job of remaining in the moment. Of being able to say that sometimes the things I lose in this life or in this phase of my life are important for what comes next. That what's happening now may give me the strength to be able to do something later. I'm not saying that God is a big bearded dude sitting in the sky working on a computer dictating everything that happens to everybody else, but I truly believe that God works in and through all things. So while God is not causing COVID, let's just be very clear about that one. God did not create COVID to teach us all a lesson, but God is working in the midst of COVID-19 to help us take something from this. God reaches down into our not okayness, takes all of the feelings that we have and breathes new life into them, so that one day, in God's timing, we will be able to understand and appreciate everything that we have differently. I go back to the person I thought I was going to be when I was in high school, and the person I thought I was going to be my junior year of college. And to be totally honest, I'm really thankful I'm not that person. I'm really thankful that life didn't happen the way I told God I wanted it to. I'm really grateful that I'm not the one who's in control. Because the gift of my life now is far beyond what I ever imagined for myself. even in my not okayness now, I can say I know God will work all things for good. And I can't wait to see what God is up to. There will be struggles and trial and tribulation. And there will be moments in which our world is darker than it's ever been before. But do not be afraid, for God is with you today and every day. Amen.